Hello, I'm Peter Towers. Welcome to the Chief Financial Officer Services webinar for subscribers, members of ESS BIZTOOLS. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to be talking about the Chief Financial Officer Services, which can be many and varied, depending on a number of circumstances, obviously. So let's look at some of these. We've summarised a number of services that are provided by CFOs, primarily working for larger businesses, because that's where the concept of chief financial officers came from. But with today's technology, today's communications, and today's problems within businesses, many accountancy firms can deliver CFO services on a virtual basis to your clients. So that will mean that you potentially could be acting for, 5, 10 clients performing a CFO service. It really gets back to how many of your team members are involved and able to attend to various delegated functions to assist the clients to run better businesses. CFO services not only are being delivered to SMEs, but for not-for-profit organisations, charities, and larger sporting organisations, because many of the duties performed by CFOs for larger organisations are also relevant to those types of activities, because they need strong accounting systems. They need regular briefings on the financial position. They need someone to be the storyteller, to outline clearly what the figures mean, to guide them in their various operations, SMEs, not-for-profits, charities, larger sporting organisations. This guide of CFO services has been prepared for you to utilise in your analysis, whereby you will have access to some of the services that you could offer to determine what would best suit a particular client. Because not all your clients are going to need all these services. And indeed, some might need additional services also. So we're assuming, but that can be dangerous, that most of your clients, if not all your clients, fit the categories that we've described: SMEs, or perhaps not-for-profits, charities, large sporting organisations. But it could also include churches and other community organisations. And obviously licensed clubs, members licensed clubs, also would fall into this category. If you have encountered requests for additional services to those that we have summarised in this CFO guide, I would appreciate it if you would send me the details, because we can then examine them and potentially include that service within our product package for chief financial officers. And that will mean we'll write some additional information so that our total membership is aware of those extra organisations that are seeking services and the type of services that they are seeking. So we're now going to go to the ESS BIZTOOLS website for an overview of the CFO services that we envisage that you could provide to your clients. You should now be able to see the ESS BIZTOOLS homepage on your screen. We're going to CFO services, so I'm clicking on CFO services and we will start working through it. So this is the package And there is another training presentation. If you wish to watch that, you can. And we will now download the content. When we go on to the content, the first thing you find in each of our product packages is the procedure control form. If we just bring that up. The CFO procedure control form is now on your computer. You will notice that the control form runs from A to R. There's a lot of components for CFO services. They're not all going to apply to the one client, of course, but the idea is that you can look through this and decide what procedure forms you're going to use and implement it. You've got the quotation and proposal. It's essential, of course, that there is a quotation and a proposal for every advisory services role, and in particular the CFO role. You need to define to your client the duties you're going to perform, because you're doing these on a part-time virtual capacity. So we need to clearly identify what you're doing. The preamble, which discusses various aspects, the briefing materials, some steps 10 to 11, and then all these sub-items: taxation, audit, expenses and cost control, capital expenditure, financial accounts, and so on. There's a whole range of activities there that I will leave you to read at your leisure. And then we have the quotation and proposal. There is a background paper on Chief Financial Officers 570040, which outlines the approach that we suggest you take. And then we've got some of the other material that I'm going to share with you shortly. So to start our process, we might go to the Chief Financial Officer package, paper 570040. This paper has been written as a guide to you, and I wouldn't hand this to a client. This is where we're talking to you and giving you an overview of what we think are the important aspects of these packages. So this all probably started on a one-on-one meeting. You sat down and had a discussion with your client. You may have used the SME needs analysis and have raised questions with the client. And in that discussion, you've mentioned CFO services, and your client said to you, well, what's all that about? Can you be my Chief Financial Officer? And hopefully you've answered yes, and you've said that you will give them a proposal. The introduction to Chief Financial Officers, we'll have a look at that in a moment. And I think you should be offering this service to all Class A clients. This is important to help them run their businesses. I think for part of every week, your SME clients need a CFO. You're going to have to sit down and discuss that with your client and decide how many hours that is and what the remuneration is going to be for the supply of these services. The types of services could include an in-depth monthly review of management accounts prepared on a departmental basis, updating of budgets and cash flow forecasts, review of the debtors' aged analysis each month, and reviewing the debtors' control system, review of other working capital items, stock, work in progress, creditors, monitoring the business's bank account, and looking at what's the cash flow forecast saying might be the situation in 6, 8, 10 months' time. Is there some turbulence approaching? And that could be caused because of concern about what's happening around the world at present, that raw material being purchased to come to Australia, coming from an area that shipping's now diverting around, so shipping is taking longer to get to Australia and there's less of it. Does that mean the inventories had to increase? But I presume the supplier of those services and goods is looking for payment, What's that done to the cash flow? It's an important part of this because that's the role you will have to play in advising your clients, preparing cost estimates on a wide variety of matters. I was a CFO of a listed public company. I was also the company secretary. And there was a lot of requests came to me every day looking at costings, the what if questions, I call them, from the CEO and other members of the leadership team and some of our external directors. Undertaking insurance reviews, looking at the risk analysis that the business has got. If the business is an exporter or importer, evaluating the effect of international currency transactions, being on top of that, knowing what the exchange rates are, and trying to understand where they might move. Review of government grants. There's a lot of government grants in Australia from state, federal, and some local governments. Understanding what they are, understanding if your client will be eligible for them, and possibly undertaking the company secretary's role. It normally goes with the chief financial officer duties. It's enlightening to consider the duties of a chief financial officer. A few years ago, when newspapers still held advertisements for job positions, I did a 6-month review of ads for chief financial officers. And we did an analysis of that and put it all together. So we had the financial function, lead, plan, and direct the financial strategy of the business, management of financial and business services, accounting, taxation, audit. Now, you wouldn't be undertaking the audit, of course, and in many of your SME clients, there might not be an audit, but there could be, and that would be making sure you're liaising with the auditors. You know what the auditor's program is, so you know that when you're going to have your work completed so that they can conduct the audit. Detailed expenses and cost of sales analysis. Cost of sales analysis is very important. Can the gross profit percentage be changed? Have you looked at undertaking benchmarking comparisons to competitors in the line of business that your client's operating in, so that you can understand it? And I don't think you should compare to the average of a particular business category. Try and get the top 20%, because that's what your client should be aspiring to be a leading business, not an also-ran. So part of the detailed analysis and cost of sales analysis, I think, should be looking at benchmarking reports. Capital expenditure monitoring can eat up a lot of money, making sure that there's been proper reviews done before the capital expenditure even gets started in the business. Overseeing accounts payable, accounts receivable, and payroll functions. They're all areas where fraud can be committed. And you need to be making sure that you're on top of this. Your team understand that you're monitoring the risk analysis for this business. You understand the various points of control. Cost control, that's what we're leading into. Preparation of monthly financial accounts, very important. Responsibility for the integrity of the general ledger. And that basically means that entries are made according to a proper process, and that people are not just putting in one-sided entries or other strange, incorrect accounting processes. And an analysis of the financial data. Let's look at the commercial functions. Management of commercial business services, including information technology functions. Having an awareness. You might not be the expert as such, but you need to have an overview of what's happening, especially in an SME type business, because there won't be too many other internal experts working there. Human resources, the treasury, what's going on with the money, what the control is on the finances of the business. Risk management, I mentioned before. Is there effective cash flow management? Is management working daily, weekly, monthly, and then daily, weekly, monthly, not just waiting for the end of the financial year, built around a tax return lodgement. The tax return really is a side issue when it comes to looking at the CFO services. Develop effective banking relationships to drive future growth of the business. It's important that there is a communication with your bank so that in times of urgency, there can be a quick approach made for whatever is needed to sort out. I experienced that many years ago in my role as a company secretary, CFO in a listed public company, when we were a major meat exporter and there was a longshoreman strike in America. And it meant that we could not ship, and it meant that our stock was going to build up both in America and Australia very quickly. And we needed temporary additional funding. And the fact that we had very good relationships with our own bank, and in anticipation that something might happen like this one day, our bank had actually introduced us to a major American bank, and we'd already had discussions with them. We'd already submitted financial data to them, so that when we contacted them, said that event that we hoped would never occur has occurred, and they were aware of that because they knew there was a longshoreman strike, which went on for weeks and weeks. They were able to implement a financial plan and funds for us within 3 working days. It was very effective, but that came about because we'd had some planning going on. We'd made the contact. We talked to our banks. They'd introduced us to another bank, and we were able to roll it out. Manage all matters relating to working capital, debtors, stock, work in progress. There's a lot of things can go wrong there, and there's avenue for fraud in those areas. Look at the contractual obligations of the business. Detailed budgets and cash flow forecasts, general planning, analysis of the management strategic growth incentives, including potential acquisition of other businesses. That's what we call strategic management consultancy. You can look at that, BAS 019. Management of the commitments, forecasts and cash flows on a major contract, pricing and commercial negotiations. Now remember, these are key items that we extracted from advertisements for a chief financial officer. That's why a couple of them sound very similar. The business growth, drive profitable growth achieved by understanding the business fundamentals. Establish strategies and tactics for business growth and shareholder value improvement. Execution or financing strategies, merger and acquisition. Focus on the key financial data, key performance indicators, benchmarking comparisons. I mentioned them before. Create efficiencies by managing margins and analysing costs and risks. Being the company secretary, reporting to the chairman and the board of directors. Executive management team, being part of that and making sure that that team is getting the information that they need, preferably in the language that they understand. Or if they don't understand the language, conducting some training courses with them. So that gives you hopefully an overview of a lot of the activities, but the personal attributes of a CFO. Hands-on approach, very important. A disposition for challenging the status quo, and that's going to really come to the fore in helping CEOs of SME companies who are wanting to scale up and grow. Ability to engage and influence a wide range of internal and external stakeholders. Your communication skills are going to be important in this role. You need to be the storyteller. You need to be able to do the financial projections and understand the figures and then communicate in a way that the whole leadership team understand it, get the message, know where they're at. So that's going to mean, in most cases, not talking in accounting jargon, but converting the accounting jargon into information that the leadership team of this particular business that you're working for understand what you're saying. And a lot of that gets back to the terminology of gross profit percentages and business metrics. I found years ago that the foreman in our major meatworks did not understand a very important daily report that was primarily being prepared for them and the general manager of that meatworks, of course, but primarily for the foreman. It was all about the yields and other aspects of what was happening within a meatworks operation, which I won't take you through, but information. And we found that they didn't seem to be responding to various trigger points that we thought they'd be wanting to know more information. So I walked into the smoko room one morning pretty early before they actually started work and asked them what they thought of these reports. They said, "What report?" I said, "The key performance indicator report." Don't know what that is. I showed them, "Oh, that stuff, we don't understand that, so we don't even read that," was the response out of about a dozen foremen sitting around having a yarn before they started work. And I said, "Oh, okay. How about I come back and talk to you at lunchtime? Can I talk to you at lunchtime? And I'll get your input." So I went back there and said to them, "Okay, how would you change it?" And on a whiteboard, I showed them what we were trying to report to them, what it was. And they said, "Well, don't call it that, call it this, because we understand." So we changed the whole language of the document to suit what they understood, because after all, they were the prime people that were going to read it. And I went and showed the general manager of that works, and he agreed, and then we implemented it company-wide in our other major meatworks. Very important to make sure that the people who you are preparing the information for actually understand what they're reading. Drive financial asset management and so on. What are you providing as part of a Chief Financial Officer service package? There's a whole segment of information there. So I'm going to leave that to you to read and to think about as you evaluate what you could supply to your client. There's a very important document, and that's the evolution of accounting services. Which I've now got on the screen. This is a 3-year evolution. Business advisory services, as our prediction, will continue to grow. An increasing number of accounting and bookkeeping firms will react to the warnings given by the now retired tax commissioner. Corporate financing arrangements will continue to grow. Digital transformation will grow. Cybersecurity is a major concern, and so on. So that's just giving you some background information. I think it's important that you understand your clients' businesses far better than what you probably understand them if your role has been traditionally providing them an annual set of accounts and a tax return. In my experience, you don't really understand what goes on in your client's business. You need to if you're going to perform a Chief Financial Officer role. So our aim is that you will understand the business 1 inch wide but a mile deep. You really need to understand who's got authority to do what, where all the operations are, where the intellectual property is, especially if it's not registered, how's it been safeguarded, and so on. So hopefully that might give you, I recommend that you look into that report. We also have the vision for accountancy firms. And this is a document that you might get your team and your partners to complete so that we get an understanding of who really wants to do advisory services. Because nothing worse than forcing people to do something they don't want to do. Sometimes it's necessary, of course. But, some people just want to do accountancy and financial planning. But then we get into Chief Financial Officer services. Are they interested in doing that? And then the whole range of business advisory services, whole range of activities. So you might want to take your team through that particular role. You see, there's a whole range of material here. I'm just looking for some of these that I'm going to And the one I was looking for is this one, the duties of the Chief Financial Officer. This is a document we wrote based on our reviews of advertisements and also based on my knowledge. And it is similar to some of the material which I've just shown you, but I'm just showing you it's there. It's a separate document. You could print that out and discuss that with your client so they have an understanding of what could be included in a Chief Financial Officer role. I don't expect that anyone servicing SMEs is going to need to cover all of this, but some of it most definitely will be information that I think you will need to be discussing with your clients. There's various papers that I'm referring to here that we're suggesting you read. Read Stock Evaluation, BAS 176. We got mention here of the compliance function audit. So this is to guide you in the process of what you're identifying as going to be CFO duties. But bear in mind, if you're avoiding certain components of the business that falls within the definition financial, commercial, or management accounting, I think that could be dangerous. If you're going to be undertaking a CFO service, I think you've got to make sure you're covering all of the activities that relate to financial, commercial, management accounting issues. And I would add to that company secretary roles, so that there's not an area that no one's looking at, but everyone thinks you're looking at. So we've got expenses and cost control, capital expenditure, the financial accounts, and you'll see all these things are linked. So you can go back to them, read them, and get an understanding of how we're proposing you would treat those items. And obviously you're then going to decide what's going to be included in what you submit to your client that you're going to be handling. Performance measures for key performance indicators, break-even calculation, benchmarking for SMEs, separate papers on all these issues. This is the most comprehensive package within ESS BIZTOOLS because it's undoubtedly the most important. And it's really the pinnacle. It's what I think we should be aiming for with virtually every client if they're in business. Now, obviously, if they're rather small, it'll be nowhere near the intensity of others. But we've got clients offering these services, earning fees of $20,000 to $140,000 for the supply of these services. It's cheaper than the client hiring a full-time CFO. They've got to find one, and they've got to find one that's prepared to go and work for a small organisation. There might be people who are offering virtually the same service, who are experienced CFOs, and they might say to 2 or 3 businesses, well, I'll be your CFO and you pay me 70 or 80 grand each. So there are potential competitors for this work. But I think that we're giving you a tremendous amount of resources here, which those other people will not have unless they become our subscribers. And that gives you an advantage of being able to talk the talk to your clients and to produce any of these papers. If you want to show them to the client and use them as an indicator to them of the way you're going to go about doing the work, please do so. That's what they're there for. You can badge these papers with your firm name on them and use them as part of the proposal. We're looking then, I've flicked through now to risk management. Very important. The Personal Property Securities Register. Make sure you've got that high on your list as you get involved with companies who are scaling up and doing more. It's a potential risk area for them, real risk area. And I think because all the discussions in the media, etc., on the Personal Property Securities Register have died down since the disastrous attempt that the first government to introduce it, the Rudd government, made of that legislation. And there's probably not much discussion going on at present, but you should make sure your clients are aware of the necessity to look at protecting certain aspects of their business. Working capital, analysis of working capital. And that brings in the stock metrics chart, it brings in debtors' days outstanding, it brings in the general procedure on debtors. Grants, what's happening with grants? Business performance and growth. The survival in difficult times for SMEs series, which we've developed. Because somewhere in Australia, every year, there are disasters. We're watching a few at present, aren't we? We've already had floods in parts of Queensland and New South Wales. Now we've got them again in northern New South Wales. That's affecting a lot of businesses, and they need assistance. And I suggest that survival in difficult times, if you've got clients in those areas, might be something worth using to try to get a good understanding of what those clients need. Customers. Selling. Who's your salesperson? Who makes the sales? Is there a sales funnel calculation sheet used? Are there sales targets? What about business valuations? How's that done? Due diligence report. Checklist for the company. Research and development, a vital area. An area that a lot of SMEs are involved in, but I have great difficulty finding accountancy firms who are actually delivering research and development advice. Please look at it. A lot of your clients are potentially interested in it. And it's an interesting and challenging work for your firm. Accountants all over Australia are saying you have trouble hiring and retaining talent. Well, a variety of services, challenging services, is one way to do it. You know, your accountants have all been to university. They've gone through the subsequent PY type years. They're looking for challenges. They're not content to just sit there with straightforward work. Challenge them. Investment readiness. This is a concept that I think is very important, that our clients should have accounting and financial data virtually being prepared each week, each month, so that if a potential purchaser or joint venturer or something along those lines walked in and wanted to talk to them and was interested in acquiring the business or acquiring a shareholding in the business, and if that suited your client, you need to respond quickly, not have the information ready 6 to 8 months later, which I've seen in some instances, because no one was up to date, because documents were not finalised, and etc., etc. So having an awareness of investment readiness is very important, and that will be driven by you if you're offering the CFO service to your clients. Company secretarial. I'm assuming that every organisation that you're offering a CFO service to is a company or is an organisation that runs as a company. It might be a charity or some sort of not-for-profit that's not actually incorporated. But company secretarial duties are important. Understanding corporate governance and understanding the directors' duties and responsibilities. We've summarised all those. And we have a new director information pack that if your client appoints a new director or would like you to assist in the mentoring of someone that's been groomed to become a director. We have packages there that you can hand to them and sit down and talk to them and get them to understand. It's just not a matter of getting promoted and sitting around a board table. There's a lot of work to be a director, a lot of reading, and a lot of questions that they need to be formulating so they are thinking about what's going on. And then we come into some of these others, the retail businesses, some of the key areas there that we might consider. And then the trades and manufacturers. So that's the overview of the processes that we have. They're all anchored back into this procedure control form that I was going through, and I come across those ones. There are specific forms which will assist you to understand how your client's business is performing. That's these forms here. And there are various papers which will assist you. So let's look at some of the titles of them. Introduction to insurance. You need to have an understanding of insurance. Sources of finance. Weekly performance estimate report. That's a vital document. And we have more to say on that in other aspects of our material. But one of the key things I found out when I was involved in a public company was that public companies know how they are performing week by week. It always used to amaze me when I was just working in a chartered accountancy firm after I graduated. You would read public company reports, and here they'd be reporting 5 or 6 weeks after the end of the financial year on their results. One of the reasons they can do that is that they're bringing out their results internally on a weekly basis. They understand their activities. I joined a company that was in the meat industry. We had 4 major meat works. We had retail butcher shops. We had small goods factories. We had all sorts of other businesses, a trucking business and other activities. Yet each one of those had to have a weekly performance and profitability report prepared by the local team. We had 13 divisions, and analysed by the area manager, and the area accountant was involved in preparing those. And then that information would get sent through each week on a Wednesday morning to my team in head office. We'd analyse it, and I would sit down at lunchtime with a couple of sandwiches and a cup of tea with the CEO, and we would go through the results. And his first question to me was, give me the bundle that never met expectations. And there always would be some in that bundle. That's all he was interested in. He knew that the rest of them had already been looked at by the area managers. He wanted then to get feedback from the area manager, what he or she had done about fixing the problem. And that was the whole emphasis. What caused this not to perform according to our expectations? Now, it could have been a combination of factors. It could have been fraud. Some cases, unfortunately, it was. It could have been miscalculations, can happen. It may have been that the stock take in our meat operations had not been properly conducted. A guess had been put in, and that had blown out all the gross profit percentages, and there was a few repercussions about that. It could have been that some special orders that had been placed, so that we're going to supply a fantastic special product to be featured in our promotions for that week, had not arrived. Therefore, we didn't have that great product being introduced, which would have driven sales, but also potentially improved the GP percentage. So the key thing was, though, that the local team found out what had caused that problem and then fixed it. Now, if the same problem occurred the following week, there was a major investigation. Other companies do that. Woolworths, Coles do it for every one of their stores. They might have 45 sections in a store, but on what some of the general managers of those stores have shown me, they know by about Tuesday of each week how they've performed in those various sales, gross profit percentages, the other key performance indicators that they want. I did some consulting for some IGA stores some years ago, and they use basically the same system, so they know the results. Now, compare what happens to your SME client, who may well be competing against some of the business units within Woolworths or Coles, or competing with IGA stores. And if they're not going through this approach of a weekly analysis and profitability estimate, they really don't know where they are. And in particular, if there's a problem, they don't get it fixed. I think that's what your key role is as the CFO, to get this discipline of we must know our results each week and we are going to fix it. We're going to find out what caused it and then fix it. Very, very important. Not left in the system, so because it could smolder on then for another 52 weeks, couldn't it? Might have occurred in the first week. And then what happens? If you're relying on preparing the annual set of accounts and a tax return to tell the client, pardon me, something was wrong, that might be about 80 weeks after the start of the financial year before any feedback's going to the client. They can't go back and rectify the situation then. They've lost a lot of money. And this is one of the reasons I think why we have such a high level of failure occurring in SME businesses. And with today's technology and today's communications, we can deliver those services to help our clients have a better chance of survival. So please look at that. We then move into some of the other things like the capital raising, because their funding's important. We talk about the early stage innovation companies. We talk about flowchart of retail operations, systems for business. And there's also papers there for crowdsourced funding, equity raising, debtors, work in progress. Please go through and have a good look at this. So that's the overview of what's involved in the overall process. That's the procedure control form, which will assist you to be able to understand and operate those activities for your clients. And I'm just going to try to find a form. So if you've got any other questions relating to Chief Financial Officer services, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much. And I will be talking to you again in the not too distant future. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Goodbye.